Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to another episode of YPO Presents. I'm Chris Larkins. I'm a YPO member going on 14 years and a senior partner at CEO Coaching International. Prior to that, I had a career in retail and also in manufacturing with global operations and distribution. I'm joined today by two industry colleagues and fellow YPO members. Kerry Siggins is the CEO of StoneAge, a manufacturer and distributor of high-pressure water blasting tools, increasingly powered by automation and AI. She has a global footprint with StoneAge, working with 170 dealers in 45 countries. Kerry is a good friend, and I know her to be a very effective thought leader in the industry. Welcome, Kerry.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
David Sun, my other colleague here, has a long successful history in tech, and as an entrepreneur, he founded Apple's fifth largest reseller worldwide, and in fact was recognized by President Reagan as Entrepreneur of the Year in the Rose Garden at the White House, something I would love on my own bucket list. He was president also of a NASDAQ tech company whose business grew tenfold in 5 years. He is now a partner with me at CEO Coaching International, working with global software, biotech, and other tech companies. Welcome to the broadcast, David.
My pleasure to be here, Chris.
Now, before we get started, I do want to remind our guests today who are watching live that they can post questions in the comment section below. And then also, since we do these YPO live broadcasts so frequently, please do follow us on your preferred social media platform if you aren't doing so already, so that you can receive notification of the next episode. So now on to our current episode. The topic today is cash management during a crisis. But I want to expand upon that a little bit to be able to capture something of a strategic and growth-oriented angle. It strikes me that when COVID hit so long ago, earlier this year, every business was forced by the circumstances to hold contradictory principles. On the one hand, to be ultra responsible, especially with cash, back to our topic of cash management, just to survive, because there was so much uncertainty and so much turbulence that was being created. But at the same time, we knew that business was going to go on. At some point, this was going to be in the rearview mirror. And therefore, we also had to be opportunistic. We had to leverage strategic opportunities. And even while we were being conservative with cash, we needed to look for opportunities to deploy capital and deploy that cash to stay ahead of the curve and to be a leader and not a follower in our industries. So I really want to take this topic from that angle. And my two guests here today are going to be able to elaborate upon that with real world examples of various businesses. Now, when COVID first hit, my advice to businesses around the world was to start with that conservative angle. And I recommended that my clients and other businesses within YPO build a cash bridge that would allow them to double the months of cash that they had available to fund their operations under various scenarios. And I urged them to build a dashboard that they could monitor daily, much more frequently than they would do ordinarily, to make sure that they were staying ahead of the assumptions in that cash bridge. That cash bridge did have that purpose of helping businesses survive that immediate storm that no one knew, what the magnitude was going to be and how long it was going to last. But the secondary purpose of that cash bridge, in fact, was to allow these businesses to be in a position to be opportunistic and strategic. We will all have competitors who will be too conservative with their cash. We will all have two competitors who will be jolted too severely to bounce back quickly. And while we are being responsible, we want to be looking constantly for those opportunities to be ahead of the curve. And the cash bridge that I urged allowed businesses to understand if they were staying ahead of the assumptions that were in the cash bridge and be able to isolate the amounts of cash and capital that they would have to deploy. So under that principle of the two contradictory ideas, survival and opportunism, let's say, I want to circle back to this topic, and I want to understand during this episode, what did smart companies do back then when COVID hit to be responsible and yet be aware of those opportunities that might arrive and be ready for them? What are companies doing to prepare for the end of the year now that we're about to enter into the fourth quarter? And what are businesses doing now, the specific activities or the specific measures that they're taking to prepare themselves for the most successful 2021 possible? My guest, Kerry Siggins, is going to use an actual company example from Stone Age, which is a middle market global industrial company that also is quite active in the services realm. And I think we have a lot to learn. In fact, I know we have a lot to learn from this example. David Sun, our guest, our second guest, is going to use some examples from very large, well-known companies around the world. And I believe with these two guests, we're going to get a very good balance of middle market, industrial, large, tech, hospitality, and a nice diversity of businesses. So, Kerry, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay.
Sure.
So, when COVID hit, what are some of the initial measures that Stone Age took to manage cash and its business more responsibly?
Sure. So just to give a little bit of context about what we do, we create industrial cleaning tools that are used in all kinds of industrial facilities around the world. So chemical plants, refineries, food processing, shipyards, anything that you would use ultra high pressure water to clean. So while we're not recession proof, we're pretty resilient industry because we live in a dirty world and everything needs to be cleaned. And we have to keep infrastructure going. So I wanted to be very careful about the decisions that I made because we had no idea exactly how hard it was going to hit us or how fast it was going to hit us. And we are absolutely a now industry. So if I made too deep of cuts too quickly, we could put ourselves into a pretty bad position. So it was an interesting first month or so as I was waiting to see what was going to happen. So what I did immediately was cut out all discretionary spending, only the absolute requirements for OpEx did we allow it to spend. In fact, for that first month and a half, I was approving all capital expenditures. And I never do that. I don't micromanage like that, but it was that serious. We wanted to make sure that everybody understood that this could be a very dramatic impact on the company. The second thing that we did was we focused heavily on AR. So we knew that to manage cash, we were obviously going to have to continue to try to sell our products. We were also going to have to make sure that our customers were paying us. And so we were very proactive in working with our clients and called them immediately and worked on plans with them and took a very, we're here for you type of approach. We will work with you type of approach. And I think that proactive consideration that we gave to AR really helped us through this. The third thing we did is we developed a plan that if this is going to have a more dramatic impact on us than what happened immediately, what are we going to do? So we made a plan for layoffs, for wage cuts, and things like that so that we could implement it quickly when we knew that we had to. Again, trying to be conservative with, how fast do we move? How deep do we cut? And so having that plan allowed us to then, when we said, okay, this is going to have an impact, we think it's going to be not a U-shape or a V-shape recovery, an L-shape recovery, we could go ahead and implement that right away. So we were ready for it when we needed to make that decision, and we did ultimately make that decision. And then we were proactive with our bank, extra communicative. We wanted them to have confidence in our storytelling and our communication. So that way, as we were trying to see what was going to happen, managing our line of credit, managing our cash, how is the PPP loan going to work? We wanted to be able to really partner with them on that. So those were the actions that we immediately took. We did ultimately decide to lay off 5% of our workforce and do a staggered wage cut. But we made that decision in early June once we knew exactly what this was going to look like.
Yeah, and those were all super responsible best practice measures. And yet you operate across 45 countries. So you had to follow, the diversity with which this hit different economies and different markets and the diversity with which different governments responded to COVID in the first place, right? I mean, did you feel like you were chasing or following the pandemic as it spread across the globe?
Absolutely. And then interestingly enough, as the United States was going into lockdown, China was coming out of it, and China is a very big market for us. And so we were seeing things starting to spin back up relatively quickly, which was also feeding some of our decision making, going, okay, so, China was shut down for X number of months. This is how the bounce back started to happen. What do we think this will happen in our other key markets, particularly the United States, Europe, and the Middle East? So yes, it's been interesting to follow it along throughout the entire pandemic so far.
Yeah, and that's an interesting tip for our audience here, I think, right? Like if they, if an audience member here does have a global business, looking for the pockets of opportunity around the world as economies open up, and maybe shifting additional sales and marketing resources to those economies, and just maintaining that flexibility seems like a best practice for others to follow, right?
Absolutely. We tried to figure out how can we invest in China right now. And of course, there are other issues with the Chinese market, of course, with the trade war, which is, of course, still in effect. So, it was an interesting time to figure out how do we push forward into China with the given constraints that we have there as well. Our products have a 25% additional tariff put onto them right now. So it definitely was some interesting discussions and decision making.
Yeah, I bet. And yet at the same time, I happen to know that you moved forward with and completed a strategic acquisition of Breadware, an AI software company, during this period of being conservative with cash. Elaborate a little bit upon why you decided to go forward with that.
Yeah, well, I had many sleepless nights over it. So one of the things that brought us, when the 08-09 crisis happened, financial crisis happened, we were a very different company then, but we made the decision at that time to invest in product development and in marketing. And we bounced back so much quicker than our competitors in the market. And so I took that same approach. Even though this crisis is very different than the 08-09 one, I still know that we need to position ourselves to be the supplier of choice, the partner of choice when we come out of this. So I wanted to follow that same thought process. And so what we really did is we looked at this saying, okay, we don't know what this is, the next year is going to look, the next 6 months is going to look like, the next year, but we do know that we have a very specific vision. And part of our vision is, our vision is to be the leader in robotics and automation in the industrial cleaning market. And so Breadware, being a company, a product development company, designing IoT, Internet of Things, connected devices, robotic products, it's very much a part of our future. So I had to weigh the use of cash. Is this a good use of cash? How am I going to, keep this additional headcount employed and really balance those decisions? And so I went back to what got us through that time, and that is knowing that we're a product leadership company, and we have to invest in our products, and we have to invest in the products that are going to be the future, which is going to look very different due to COVID. And so that's ultimately why I made the decision to go through with the acquisition. We closed on it on March 31st. So it was still very early in the US's shutdown, and it was a very scary decision to make. I definitely think that many of my employees didn't understand why we were doing it.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, but I think that's also an inspiring example for members here of the audience, right? Like if you are responsible enough and proactive enough managing your cash, you can do so. You can leave yourself a little bit of a reserve so that you're not behind the curve when the market bounces back, whenever that might be, right? Like, so
absolutely.
Right, like just to give you that opportunity to be an even better company on the other side of this.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I could do this is because I had been managing my cash so well prior to the acquisition that I could feel comfortable still doing this, because I couldn't go to a banking, I was planning on paying cash for it. I wasn't going to go to a bank and get a loan on March 31st to do this. The deal was almost done. And the only reason why I was able to is because of good cash management practices prior to the acquisition.
Excellent. Yeah, I think you're dead on right there. So David, reflecting on Carrie's example here, can Can you comment, what comes to mind as an example of a very large, well-known company that managed its cash very conservatively to make sure that it had, say, an opportunistic future?
You know, Chris, I looked at many companies. There are many good examples, but I picked Marriott International simply because they are in an industry that has suffered the most probably under this pandemic, right? They had one of the worst financial quarter they ever had in their company's history. But the good news is because they acted so decisively early, right? They furloughed 70% of their employees really early. There's one very famous video now you can watch on YouTube by the CEO Arne Sorensen. He made I was imagine most CEOs' most difficult announcement to their employee, their entire company, and you can watch it. He spoke from his heart, and a lot of people have tears watching this video that I recommended. Seriously, that he made the decision very quickly and very decisively. Furloughing almost up to 70% of the workforce is an incredible act. But the good news is right now, I think they are planning on to bring back quite a significant number of those people back. A couple of things happen. Like Carrie mentioned, China, Hong Kong, Macau, and Taiwan has suffered the pandemic earlier than us. So they actually went down. For Marriott, their business went down almost, 60% or 90% in the beginning stage. Now, they have recovered much quicker than the US market. So they are almost back to 60% occupancy rate, which is only 10% lower than last year at the same time. So that part of the world is really helping Marriott.
Yeah, and I can imagine that Marriott, you know, and that I have seen that video, and it's really tough to watch, and it's heartfelt, and yeah, I think we could all put ourselves in the CEO's shoes. He had a large scale furlough and layoff that he had to do, and that's larger than most of us are used to. But it's tough to let go of one person sometimes, and we all had to live through that to some degree. But Marriott, you would imagine, then would be in a position possibly to you know, they've acquired several other hospitality logos in the past several years. This might put them in a position to have a cash reserve to continue to do that. And then also just to improve guest experience. So the more conservative you were in hospitality with your cash, the easier it would be to make upgrades to your lobby and to your room experience, and you know, to invest in different disinfecting procedures and protocols, right? So
exactly, and they've done exactly that. By the way, one of the key pivot that they did, most people probably don't even recognize, is back in early spring last year, they started pivoting to Marriott Homes and Villas, which is an alternative to Airbnb, which is a huge market, as we all know. So they have actually seen that market has grown tremendously, right? They saw 2x increase in their revenue, and they also increased 5x on the number of properties that they're doing for homes and villas, from 2,000 to almost 10,000 in 250 markets. That's huge. However, as big as it is still a small piece of the pie compared to 7 million homes on Airbnb's portfolio. So I think Marriott is doing the right thing, but there's going to be a huge climb for them to come out of this pandemic nevertheless. But I think they make the right choice. They made it quickly, and that really helped them to be positioned correctly, like you said, Chris, and be able to look at opportunity. And there are plenty of opportunity during this crisis for people to expand, gain market share, and really start looking at your business, the new way of doing business in the future. So I think that
we don't, well, obviously we don't all have Marriott's market cap and access to you know, borrowed capital and such, but I think we can nonetheless be inspired, right? Like this is an example of a company that cut back very deeply, as many of us did, but yet maintained a focus on strategy. So and that strategy is twofold, as you explained here, right? So one is our revenue in the future may not come from the same place it came from in the past. Right, so Marriott shifted to Marriott Vacation Villas, and so the need to go back to your sales roadmap and your plan and your playbook with a different set of assumptions post-COVID, I think is displayed by Marriott. And on the second hand, again, setting themselves up for, say, an industry roll-up in the future. Again, most of us don't have the opportunity to do roll-ups on the scale of a Marriott or one of these other large global brands. But the scale is not as important as if you're a $10 million business, a roll up of another 5 million of post-COVID revenue would be a big deal. It's 50% growth. So I think to the extent that we can be inspired by Marriott's example, cut deep, be conservative, don't wish this away, and yet maintain that reserve to be strategic, both in terms of where your revenue is going to come from and have the ability to fund a pivot there and look for acquisition opportunities. Sounds like this would be a good example for our audience to follow, right, David?
Correct. And one more thing, and it's very important. I think part of that video you'll see, you always want to leave your employees with great empathy and deep respect, which is very important, right? Like I said, right now they are going to bring back significant portion of those people back. So you really want them to feel like they really belong to the organization, even during difficult times like furlough.
Makes complete sense. And we're getting a lot of really good questions here that are starting to populate. And a lot of the questions are circling back towards cash management. So what I'd like to do is kind of circle through. I have a couple other questions for you guys that are still along the lines of this contradictory principle. And I think even those who are asking about cash management and salary cuts and the like are envisioning a future in which they can be opportunistic. So I'm gonna move through a couple more questions along those lines, and then get to the audience questions, which again are a little bit more about salary restoration and cash management and such. Carrie, let me flip back to you. As you look forward to 2021, all things considered, the cuts you've had to make, the maybe the salary adjustments that you've made and not yet restored, but also some of the strategic moves that you've made that you've mentioned here on the call. What's the number one action that you're taking now to ensure that you have the most successful 2021 possible? And if you can, try and hit both sides of that dichotomy.
Everything is a dichotomy these days, isn't it? There is no right or wrong answer. It's both right and wrong at the exact same time. So I'm going into 2021 very conservatively. So I'm developing multiple scenarios, and I think that would be my advice to everybody is have multiple scenarios that you can enact quickly, depending on if you're hitting your forecasts or not, or exceeding it. So what I'm doing is I'm planning conservatively, and I'll have my stretch goals, and that's when I'll re-implement some of the things the cuts that I've made. And so right now I'm planning to go into 2021 still keeping our pay cuts in place. And I really want to get through first quarter. We still have a lot of volatility ahead of us, I believe, particularly in our industry. There's a lot of changes that are happening in oil and gas. And so I want to make sure that I'm really smart about it. So I'm being conservative, but I've also picked what are the two things that are going to help me get to my 2025 vision? What are the two most important things that we have to get done? And I'm investing in those. So I may even be hiring to be able to move forward on those initiatives. And so it's the dichotomy. It's being very conservative and cutting where I can and watching costs very closely, but not doing so at the expense of the two most important things that I have to do to get to where I want to be in 2025. And that's the dichotomy of what we have to do as leaders, as we have to figure out how to play both sides of that line and do it while still inspiring your employees to show up every day who are, sharing in the pain of pay cuts and doing more with less right now and going, well, what is surviving like? And why are we investing in our future? And so making sure that you do a very good job of transparently telling that story to do both simultaneously.
Yeah. And I know a lot of people's minds right now are rightly focused on the darker side of the dichotomy, right? Like, because there is so much uncertainty and businesses, have really tough decisions to make about their people and about their salary and whether they can restore their previous salary levels or bring people back or begin to hire again. And it's really hard to drown out that pressure of the here and now. And in fact, it would be inappropriate to ignore it. But I'm hoping people are inspired by your example of, yes, be conservative, confront the darkness, so to speak, but at the same time, lay out that path to even bigger success on the other side of this.
Yeah, you can't just hunker down. I mean, I'm in an industry that I don't have to hunker down, and I'm very grateful for that. There are many industries that aren't in that position, and I don't want to minimize the pain that they're going through, particularly around hospitality, and bouncing back is going to be harder. But if you're in an industry that even then though, I still think you have to think about what is the future going to look like, and what little things can I put into place right now that can help me get through this, but where I can come back stronger. And you have to do that. And we have to do that every day as leaders, but I don't think that we don't pay as much of attention to it because the stakes aren't as high as they are right now. And so that's one of the lessons that I've learned out of this is to not just get complacent when you're not being a wartime CEO, that you really need to be always thinking about the dichotomies of the decisions that you have to make and the trade-offs that you have to make, and do that really smart. So that way, when the next crisis happens, because it will, how are you in a position to weather it and thrive on the other side?
Yeah, and even though you didn't have to hunker down, I am familiar with the tough choices you made nonetheless. And let's recognize that many leaders will either overreact to this or underreact. And you're right, striking that proper balance from decision to decision is, this is what we are called to be leaders for, right? To make these tough decisions.
You have to be cool, calm, and collected. There are many times that I wanted to freak out, right? Oh my God, what's happening? And just remain cool, calm, and collected, because when you're managing your emotions in this, you can see things that you might not if you overreact or conversely underreact. So cool, calm, and collected, take it seriously, manage your cash, have a strong balance sheet, and look to the future, and always be cool, calm, and collected in it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So really good questions that are populating here in the comment sections. I do want to go to one last question, and then I'm going to start going through audience Q&A. And my last question is one that we, on these YPO Live episodes, like to ask every leader that we invite. And David, I'm going to start with you and then go to Kerry. David, all things considered, what is the one piece of advice that you would give your fellow global leaders?
I would definitely say, based on everything I've read and even the people that I've talked to who have been in this very difficult period, make your decision very decisively. I think the problem with the indecisive decision is what kills most business. I think right now, like Kerry mentioned, this is really challenging times that the real leader has to stand up and show up. And I think the key is whatever decision you need to make it quickly, because time is of the essence, and there are plenty of opportunity as well as obstacles that we have to face. Take advantage of the opportunity. They don't come very often. This pandemic is once in a lifetime occurrence, and we should take full advantage of that. So don't always look at the glass as half empty. Sometimes the glass may be half full, and we need to look forward. So that's my advice.
Yeah, and that's a good point, David. And those of us in YPO are blessed with access to this global network where we can talk to other executives in the same position. I'd urge those of you who are not in YPO, first of all, please, inquire about joining. I'm on 14 years, and it was the best professional decision I made. I'll end the YPO commercial now. But if you do not, if you do not have access to YPO, find somebody that you can talk to, someone to help see the positive side of things, and someone to help hold yourself accountable to the tough decisions.
I'm 33 years.
33 years, excellent.
33 years at YPO.
Kerry, let me flip over to you. Same question. What's the top piece of advice that you would give to your fellow global leaders?
I think it's a dichotomy of the glass is half empty and half full at the same time, right? Manage your balance sheet. You have to manage your balance sheet. Do not, even if things are going better than you expected, or even if you had some sort of significant business increase, because lots of businesses do, manage your balance sheet. There's so much uncertainty coming ahead. And so that's the glass is half empty kind of side of things. And then on the other side of that, that's half full, don't be afraid to make bold moves. And you have to be thinking about where do you want to be on the other side of this. And even if you just do the one thing that's going to help you get there, the two things like what we're doing at Stone Age, don't be afraid to make that bold move to put yourself into a better position ahead of your competition when you come out of this.
Really well said. And what I'd offer in parting here before we get to audience Q&A is my biggest piece of advice is drown out the noise, focus on what you can control. And the way I would relate to this, is my own pandemic of sorts that I endured about 6 years ago. As David and Kerry both know here on the broadcast, I survived malignant brain cancer 6 years ago. And thanks be to God, the tumor has never come back. But during that time, if I asked myself, why me? And I focused on, all the negativity and all the questions and all the hypotheticals, that didn't really get me anything. And this was certainly a reality that I simply couldn't wish away for obvious reasons. And if we apply that example here to COVID, we cannot wish COVID away. There is no wishful thinking here. It's not a made-up disease, right? We need to confront this, and we will, as we've done with every pandemic. But at the same time, as we wait for that to happen, there are things we can control. And namely, in the examples we heard today, where's our revenue going to come from? It may be somewhere different than it did in the past. How are we going to manage our cash extra conservatively so that we can come out on the other side of this more strongly? And as Kerry said, how are we going to manage our balance sheet? And as David brought up with the example to Marriott, how are we going to be empathetic with our people as we need to communicate these tough decisions? So we have control over a whole lot, even if it appears that so much is uncertain. And I'd recommend that we focus ever more on those things we can control. Yeah. I'd like to go to some audience questions because we got some really terrific ones. And I will apologize. We have a global audience, so I will apologize in advance if I mispronounce any of your names. But we have a really good question here from Francois Mintour. And I'm going to address, Kerry, I know you had to make this decision, so I'm gonna have you field this. His question is, layoffs versus salary cuts. What about combined pain for all and keeping everyone's jobs? How did you balance that?
Great question, and absolutely something that we considered. And the reason why I did layoffs is partly because my future vision is different than the current one that we're living. And I wanted room to be able to, when we came back, to be able to make different decisions about the kinds of roles that needed to be filled within the organization. So I balanced, it was the dichotomy of the situation. And we're an employee-owned company, so this was even more painful. And in 41 years of business, never have we gone through layoffs. So this was something that we took very seriously, and why we waited until June to do it, because we're one family. We're all in this together. So it was part of the future, looking at the future too, and saying, okay, when we're back, are all of these jobs going to be the same? And do I have the talent on my team that's going to help me get to where I need to be? And the answer, quite frankly, was no. And so that's how I made the decisions. But everybody took a pay cut. I took the biggest, and we bracketed it down. But even our lowest wage earners took a 3%, because we're employee owned and we all have to share in it. We get to share in the success of the company, but that means that we all have to tighten our belt. So that's how we made our decision to do both a pay cut and layoffs.
Interesting. And there's a follow-up question from Francois that I'm going to get to in a moment. I want to get to a technical question that I think is nonetheless important. It comes from Jared Wu. And Kerry, since you have a global footprint, you may be able to address this question from a couple different perspectives. Jared asked whether layoffs in the United States come with a redundancy payment, or, as I take it, a required severance. In the United States, they do not, but they do in many other countries. Kerry, maybe you can talk generally about what your philosophy was when it came to severances, and then maybe what you were forced to do in a couple other countries based upon their laws, if that applied.
Sure. So in the U.S., and it also depends by state in the U.S., whether it's a right to work state or not. And so we had to look at all of that. I did give everybody a severance. I think that that's incredibly important. That included health benefits and to help them make that transition. And then, of course, we did have to look at our European employees and how that was going to impact them with both pay cuts and not impact them, how we might be impacted by the regulations and requirements based on their employment contracts. So we did have to handle things differently. It took a little bit longer to go through it into Europe than it did here in the US, but I had to just go through, state by state and country by country and make sure that we were making the decisions and implementing them in the proper way so that we didn't get ourselves in trouble with regulatory bodies.
Makes sense. And David, you work with many clients around the world. I'd imagine they have a bit of a maze to navigate here, right?
Yes.
Did you want to elaborate on that, David?
Yes, I think in some situations where I see it may or may not be a good practice for all, but certainly will be a good practice for some, is that in order to maintain some of the good employee that you don't really want to lose, they ended up deferring some of the paychecks or deferring some of the bonuses until a certain time in the future, where if the company recovers up to a certain level, then they pay that back. That's kind of an interesting way to look at, it's kind of a halfway doing like the dichotomy what Carrie's talking about earlier, which is true. It's always a difficult decision, but something like that might be a hybrid system that may work, where you keep a lot of your good employees, not having them leave, and then try to rehire them back again.
I think that's a great point. That's something that I would love to be able to do. And, maybe we do it over a multi-year period, but something that I would love to be able to give back to my employees. Another thing that we weren't able to do because we have a safe harbor 401k plan, but that was the first thing that we said, okay, instead of, pay cuts, can we do some of it by not contributing to a 401k or other benefits like that? Explore all of those different options, because there might be ways that aren't so impactful for in the moment paychecks, which many of our employees live paycheck to paycheck. So there's lots of different things that you can consider, and you should look at all of those options so that you can make the best decision for the company and for your employees.
Yeah, and that right decision is going to vary from company to company, obviously, right? In the Cash Bridge article that I published via YPO when COVID hit, and I don't know if there might be an opportunity for YPO to share this after the meeting somehow, but I know it's what you did, Carrie, and it's what most businesses did in this situation. And it was, apply certain assumptions to your revenue and incoming cash, and maybe and stress test it, right? What if revenue goes down by X%? What if accounts receivable gets delayed by 30 days? And figure out how much cash that leaves you, and then figure out how much of a cash hoard you need to continue to fund operations under those circumstances. The cuts that you would make, or the deferments you'd make, and frankly, the amount of severances you can afford is largely going to be determined by, I need to build a bridge from the, maybe 1 month of cash that I have left under these really bad circumstances to, depending on the business, it might be 2 months of cash, 6 months of cash, 8 months of cash. Every business is different in terms of how much cash it needs to have on hand at any given time. That the length of that bridge that you need to build from reality under COVID to being able to fund ongoing operations and be strategic will influence how generous or how stingy, let's say, you can or are required to be under all of these circumstances. There's a question along these lines here, though, that comes from Carrie Butt. And what do you guys foresee in terms of cash being deployed to bring headcount back, whether it's in Q4 or early next year?
David, do you want to take that?
Ask the question again. I'm not so sure I understood the question.
Do you envision cash being deployed anytime soon to bring headcount back, either in Q4 or early next year?
Well, I certainly do see that a lot of the people are being brought back. That's simple. If you look at the government statistics on the unemployment numbers are coming down significantly. So I think that's happening already. The question that Carrie mentioned is, I think many businesses are now bringing people back, may or may not necessarily be the same people or the same skill level or the same skill set. So people are scrambling to hire whatever's available resources out there that is best fit to their openings or positions. So I think that's happening. I'm for sure Q4 as well as Q1 is going to be actively rehired. A lot of furlough are being brought back, as you heard of Marriott's doing that. Amazon's actually, by the way, announced 100,000 new hires yesterday at least $15 an hour. So a lot of these numbers are coming through in a big way. So you will see that. I think, if anything, I think, Kerry probably will agree to this. It's actually harder to hire people right now in some circumstances. It's not as easy as people think, right? Under the pandemic, you should be able to get anyone you want. No, that's not true, actually. And then the other problem that the pandemic has brought to the scene is, because now everybody's working out of home base, international hiring is becoming a reality. That means you're fighting with other people that normally you're not fighting with to get the talent, right?
Yeah,
so it gets more competitive.
It's definitely going to be a challenge. And Kerry, if you don't care to comment on your own company, of course, maybe just reflect on the industry as a whole. I mean, you work with a lot of very large industrial and manufacturing clients, and you have your finger on the pulse of that industry, around the world. What's your sense as to whether hiring is going to come back?
I think in the petrochem industry, it's going to be very slow. In my industry, which I work for, the contractors that have contracts at these facilities, especially around industrial maintenance, those things have to happen. Maintenance activities still have to happen. And when plants go too long without doing maintenance, then there's emergency turnarounds and all kinds of issues. So I see, it all just depends. But so I see in my industry that we'll be hiring people back in Q4, and then particularly in Q1 when we get ready to go into spring turnarounds. But I think that, I talked to executives at Dow Chemical and Exxon, and they're still looking at cuts that they're making. So I think that we're in this for a long haul. I wouldn't expect a significant kind of turnaround and plan for a significant kind of turnaround in most industries for 2021. And then that way you're making smart decisions. And if that prediction is wrong, because let's face it, right? Our crystal balls are all filled with COVID, and we don't really know what's going to happen. But I just think that you're in a better position to be able to increase your headcount and increase your spend, rather than have to go, oh shoot, I predicted the wrong way and have to turn around the other way. Because I think there's a lot of industries that are still in for a lot of pain going into 2021.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point too, right? Like it will vary from industry to industry. I guess the good news here is if you are in a position to hire, right, depending on your specific industry, there are industries that are going to be slow, and industries like petrochem that sucked up really good technical talent and engineering talent for years might be good places to hunt. And so maybe if we're all open-minded about the specific experience, if we need an engineer. We often say, I need an engineer who has worked in my industry for 20 years. She or he may not come from your industry. And I think if we're open-minded to look at some other industries that have really good talent, be it technical or finance or sales, I think those of us in a position to hire are going to be able to find it. I want to get to just a couple more questions here. The first one here is actually sent to, is addressed to me. I'm going to field it really quickly and then circle back to you, David and Kerry, with two general questions that I think were very, very good. The first one comes from Harsh Agrawal, and he comments that things are quite harsh in India, but he mentioned that conserving cash but seeking opportunities when they present themselves is one strategy, and he's curious if it includes investing in failing markets or taking over market competitors. And my answer to that, Harsh, would be, listen, if you've built a cash bridge and it shows that you've got cash available to fund your business, and you know how much cash you have to be opportunistic, this is absolutely the opportunity for you to be looking at other markets, whether it be geographic or within your own geography, but just another revenue channel that you can apply your product or service to. And the same would be with acquiring underperforming market competitors. You should absolutely be doing that. Think of it as buying stock when the market is low. If you've got the cash to do so, every financial advisor on earth would tell you to go in. I think the takeaway that I would leave you with here is make sure you're checking your numbers, make sure you've built that cash bridge and that you feel confident about your ability to deploy that capital responsibly. But I think the future is going to be built by those who were opportunistic because they gave themselves the opportunity to do so. And we're not afraid to make those investments, just like Kerry was not afraid to complete the acquisition of an IoT company because she managed her cash responsibly. And it's going to put her in a position whereby her competitors today who did not make those investments, either because they were too nervous or they didn't have the wherewithal, they're going to be left behind and be playing catch up. So Harsh, I would take the example from Kerry here. The other questions here, I'm going to flip back to you, David and Kerry.
Hey, real quick, can I add on to that, Chris? Because I think that there's something that's really important here.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really clear to understand how, whatever you're going to invest in, how this fits into your strategy, right? If I wasn't really clear on the vision of our company, then I wouldn't have done this, and it fits. And I think that's where if you have the opportunity to do it, but make sure you have a plan with how it's going to fit, because you want to be able to capitalize on that investment as best as possible. So make sure you really understand exactly what it's going to get you on the other side of this before you make that decision.
Yeah, very good point. Don't chase shiny objects with cash. The advice, but with a solid plan and a solid cash bridge, this would be the time to do an industry roll up if it suited your strategy. So Francois Mintour has a follow-up question for both you, David and Kerry, and let's keep it really, really quick. Maybe you can give one quick answer. He asks, besides the negativity, what positives can you both take away from the COVID pandemic? Maybe if each of you can name one positive briefly in about 20, 30 seconds.
David, you want to go first?
Yes, I think real quickly, the pandemic has shown us that we are able to work from a different location than we're used to. That's one. Even though not 100%. The other major one is, you are now able to recruit. I mentioned this earlier, worldwide instead of being a local sourcing of human resource, which is talents, which is very, very different before COVID and after COVID. So I think that's going to change the way that we're going to work.
I'll take a more macro approach, because I completely agree with David on that. I think it's going to open up all kinds of opportunities about how we work. But we won't see the results of our ability to come together to solve a global problem, no matter where you are in the world, for years to come. And there's so much polarization around COVID. But the real optimist in me sees that we can tackle really big global issues together if we choose to. And I think that COVID will show us that. We have to have global leaders who say that's important. And I really hope that that's what we can do, because the significant challenges will either make or break us as a species on this planet. And so I'm hopeful that we really see the silver lining in this, and that we can work together to solve these kinds of problems.
Very well said. This last question, which comes from Bipin Patel, is a little bit of a pensive question, a reflective question, but I think COVID, as you just said, Kerry, gives us as a human race, let's say, the opportunity to be reflective. And Bipin wonders, if you could go back in time, what is the one piece of advice you would give yourself? So Kerry, why don't you field that first?
Oh, the one piece of advice that I would give myself. I think that I spent a lot of time beating myself up over the decisions that I'd have to make. And it was a really emotional time for me, just to be, vulnerable and quite honest. There were lots of tears, lots of sleepless nights. And I think I would give myself the advice to maybe not be so hard on myself. Making the decision to lay off people when we haven't done it in 40 years was brutal. And I really questioned, am I the type of leader who can actually do this? And coming out of it, I know that I can, that it just brings on resiliency. So I would go back and tell myself to be more gentle with myself.
Good advice. David?
Well, I think the obvious one to me is the well-being is so important, right? COVID really wake us up, and we realize no matter what you do, what position you're in, what market share you're trying to capture, if you don't have well-being, that should be the highest priority in everybody's strategy. And also, COVID also taught us the important, like you mentioned, Chris, the importance of really understanding cash flow. A lot of companies don't look at cash flow pre-COVID. We really should, COVID or not. I think that cash flow analysis is so important that every one of us should continue to look at that daily, if not hourly, to make sure that your company is actually going on the right direction. So
that's great advice. I think a lot of people woke up and realized, wow, I've been letting my CFO run cash. And even if you had a great CFO, I think a lot of CEOs woke up and realized that they did not understand their cash position, or maybe didn't even have a good relationship with the bank because they had delegated that task. So very, very good point, David. And my advice here would be, ask yourself whether you've aligned what you're doing with your passion. It's one of the things that I learned. I referred to my own health situation of a little over 6 years ago, and it caused me to reflect on, am I doing what I'm really passionate about? Mm-hmm. And if you realize that if COVID made you realize that the answer is no, I wouldn't suggest you just give up, right? Like, the answer to that isn't give up. Fight back, put your business in a position where it's recovered. It's the right thing to do for your own legacy of what you've done in that business. It's the right thing to do by your people. But throw yourself into building that business up to a point where you can have a successful exit, mm-hmm. And you can have a successful exit soon. And then once you've had that exit, go off and do something you're passionate about. But use this opportunity to ask yourself that question, because we're all putting in a lot of work for ourselves, for our businesses, for our people, and frankly, for the world. And there ought to be some alignment between what we do and what we're passionate about. I have one last really quick question that I'll ask here before we wrap up. It came in right at the last second here from Allison Rakato Narina. And it gets more or less to your point, David. I don't think we know the answer to this question, but she's asking what we think the effects are going to be on remote and international workers who have H-1B visas, right? Like, are they going to continue to be able to work, perhaps for American-based companies, or will the visa restrictions be loosened? None of us really knows the answer to that. But David, maybe if you can, since you work with international businesses and you fielded this topic previously about being able to recruit from anywhere, do you have a sense as to whether international contractors are going to be, popular in the labor market?
I think there's going to, of course, the surge of that happening is already going on around the world. Now, each country is going to probably establish some kind of guidelines and rules to either restrict or, skim down, right? They want to have some control. Right now, even in the U.S. or North American market, plenty of my clients are subcontracting workers from all over the world, right? Particularly like places like Asia as well as Eastern Europe. Because I involve myself quite a bit in IT business. So you have a lot of technical people who are working as subcontractor. Amazing enough, many of them have a bank account in the US. They're not physically here, but they can work for companies here as a subcontractor. So they take care of their own tax situations and whatever. So right now it's probably all legal, but the thing is, I think the government will start taking attention to this, because nobody wants, these uncontrolled workforce, right, by the government standpoint, to be freeloading or free working without paying additional restricted taxes or whatever that they want to impose on. So I would definitely see there will be some kind of regulations coming.
Yeah, it sounds like a new frontier is coming here, right? And I know, Carrie and I know this here in the United States, just the proliferation of work from home is going to have that same wrinkle just within each individual company. Very interesting question, Allison. And I wish we knew the answer, but I think you're onto something by asking it. I think that's going to be a very popular alternative for international or global contractors. Yeah. Carrie, any reflections you have on this topic?
No, I agree. I think it's going to be a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty. I would expect that remote workers are going to be probably working from their country of origin rather than in the United States, at least for the foreseeable future. But we'll see how that all plays out. But I have no idea what's going to happen. I think a lot of it will be based on the election, and at least in the United States. But right now I'm planning, I've got Indian employees, and I'm expecting that they'll be working for us from India.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think there'll be a growth there. There already are multiple BPO companies and outsourced professional companies in tech and finance and even just administrative support all around the world. I would predict that these companies are going to expand into more technical services as well, which of course they're already doing for software development and some tech verticals. But I could see that happening now in civil engineering, structural engineering, around the world as well. Listen, on that note, and on Kerry addressing the uncertainty, I'd encourage everyone to embrace the uncertainty because it's all we can do. And if we can focus on just realizing that we can't control it, we again, drown out the noise. All we can do is identify the things we can control and focus more intently on those. And I think if we do that, and if we manage our cash effectively, and if we give ourselves that opportunity to be opportunistic, whether it be launching a new product, buying a company, or moving into new markets, focusing on those levers that we can control is going to give us that chance to, let's say, to go from survive to thrive. And on that note, Kerry and David, I want to thank you for joining us today. And I want to thank everybody that tuned in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do let us know and feel free to share it within your network and to subscribe to the YPO social media channels. With that, please have a great rest of your day or afternoon or evening or early morning, based upon where you might be joining us. Thank you and hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Chris.